It was watching us. From Caleb 89. This story took place a few years ago. Me and my bestie, we will call him Zach, were out fishing in Colorado, as we always did every Saturday. It was pretty early in the morning, and we were sitting there waiting for the fish to bite. We had stayed up pretty late the night before, and I was starting to get sleepy. I started to almost doze off when I heard what sounded like a loud snapping of tree branches coming from the trees that were bordering the lake. I looked towards the trees but didn't see anything out of the ordinary. So I went back to playing the waiting game. Zach had been the only one to catch a fish so far, but a few hours had passed, and I didn't get even one bite. We were both talking about wrapping it up and heading home when we both started hearing the sound of something hitting the side of our boat. I heard it on my side first, then Zach heard it from his side. We looked around, trying to figure it out, when Zach yelled out in pain. "Ouch!" he shouted, holding his arm. He looked down and saw what looked like a small rock sitting inside the boat. He picked it up, looking confused, and I asked him if that's what hit him. "Yeah, I guess," Zach said. "But how did it hit me? What threw it?" We were looking around, scanning the tree lines, when I saw some bushes moving. I stared in that direction for a little bit, when we both heard this sound that chilled us to the bone. It's very hard to describe in writing, but imagine the sound of someone heavily grunting and gasping inwards as loudly as they can. Before I could react to what we both heard, I felt a sharp, stinging pain on the back of my neck. I yelled out in pain and looked down to see another rock. I was stunned and trying to figure out where these rocks were coming from. Then we both saw it. This dark, hairy humanoid figure stood up slowly from behind the bushes. It must have been at least 8 feet tall. It looked ape-like and had dark, reddish-brown fur covering its entire body and had yellow eyes. It looked at us and let out another long, drawn-out screech and then ran off back into the woods. We both sat there in our boat, speechless for a while, not daring to speak or move. "Did you see that?" Zach finally whispered. "Yes," I replied quietly. Zach and I came to the realization we had both probably seen a Sasquatch or something similar. We waited for a little while, making sure the coast was clear, and got our boat out of the water and quickly got ourselves back in our car. We booked it out of there full speed. As we were driving past the woods back on the main road, I saw it again. It was running very fast along the edge of the trees. Then it just stopped and watched us as our car finally disappeared from its view back out on the highway. Me and Zach have never been back out on the lake after that day. We didn't want to encounter that creature again. I had this feeling that we were trespassing on its land, and it was very angry. I'm fully convinced there are Sasquatches out in those woods, so be careful and watch your back if you plan on going fishing in Colorado anytime soon. Something is tormenting my family. From Alaska Chick. I have lived in southern Alaska with my family my entire life. My whole family has stories about our property, and I've decided to share them. These stories are spread out over the 11 years that we've lived here. I don't remember the order, so I'll be telling them as I go. I will be using fake names for everyone, and just the first initial of friends and pets. The first story that comes to mind about this place is the voice in the woods. Our property is 50 acres, and about 75% of it is woods. My siblings and I would spend hours out there, but now we rarely go there at all. Now I have a very large family, and we all live on this property except for my 2 oldest siblings. I live here with my grandpa, mom, dad, older twin sister, 2 little sisters, and 2 little brothers. The first time we heard the voice, it was just my little sister, Allie, and me. I was 13, and Ali was 11. The weather was warm during the middle of June, and we wanted to ride our dad's black four-wheeler around the trails. We were on the other side of the property having fun, and we even stopped for a moment to play in the river. Then we started to smell something bad. It was so bad that it made me gag and stop the four-wheeler. It smelled like a rotting animal that's been sitting in the sun for a week. We didn't want to know what it was that was dead and didn't want to stick around. I had started to drive away down another trail when I heard Ali yell my name. "Lynn!" I stopped the four-wheeler and turned to her to see what was wrong, but she just looked at me, confused. When I asked her what, she said she hadn't said anything. I figured it was just in my head, but before I could continue driving, we heard it again. "Lynn!" I could feel Ali's body go still behind me as she stared ahead. Something called my name in Ali's voice, and it was coming from in front of us where the smell was. I immediately felt the fight or flight response in me, along with the reaction to protect my little sister, and turned around as fast as I could, flooring it back to the house. I nearly flipped the four-wheeler twice and almost hit a tree. I felt like something was watching us as we were leaving. Our dad saw the way I was driving on his new four-wheeler, and I got in trouble. Neither Ali nor I told our dad what happened, because we didn't want him to think we were too scared to be playing in the woods by ourselves anymore. I didn't go back into the woods for a few weeks. The second time we heard the voice was when we were all in the woods, except for my older brother. It was me, my two older sisters, Mari and Renee, and my two younger sisters, Ali and Jolene. I was 15 this time. Mari, Renee, and Jolene were on our grandpa's six-wheeler. Ali was riding our mom's four-wheeler, and I was riding our dad's. We'd been out there for a while and were racing when we knew we weren't supposed to. We were also on the other side of the property again. That way we couldn't get caught. Ali was close behind me, and Mari was in front around the turn. She was waiting for us to catch up. As we sat there listening to Mari brag about winning, we all heard our mom yell, "Girls!" Thinking Mom was finally home from the store with dinner and needed help bringing in the groceries, we sped to the house, slowing down before we got close enough that she could hear us so she wouldn't think we were speeding around. When we got there, Mom was just getting out of her car. We parked the four-wheelers and got off, walking over to our mom. We asked her why she had called us and what she needed, but she looked at us strangely. She told us she had just come down the driveway and didn't call us. She wasn't at the house when we were called. Then I realized something that made my heart race and my blood run cold. Even if Mom had been at the house, there's no way we would have been able to hear her from the other side of the property, especially with the two four-wheelers and six-wheeler running. I didn't tell my sisters about that because I didn't want to scare them. The last time I heard the voice was only last month. I'm 19 now. I had a falling out with a close friend who had been to my house many, many times in the past. I'll call her N. It was 8 in the morning, and I was heading to my Jeep about to leave for work. Purse on my shoulder, full coffee cup in hand. I was ready to go. Then I heard N's voice coming from the woods. Help. I stood there for a second, confused and just staring into the woods, waiting to see if it would happen again. Was someone on our property? But soon I felt panicked and quickly got back inside because something about the voice was familiar. Other than the fact that it was N's, I felt uneasy. N hasn't been to my house in 3 years. Something about the voice was wrong. It was as if it were whispered and calm, not the way someone would be calling for help if they needed it. The voice also didn't sound organic, like it was a recording, but not from a radio or phone. It didn't make any sense, and because I didn't hear it again, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. I ended up running to my Jeep like a scared little kid, locking all the doors once I was inside. I took one more look at the woods and I didn't see anything, so I left for work, driving a little faster than I should have up the driveway. I loved telling my coworker all the scary stories about my house because it would freak her out. When I got to work and told her what happened, she was jumpy for a few hours, and it really didn't help when one of our brooms fell off the wall without us being near it. I told her someone probably didn't put it back on the hook properly. It seemed to calm her down just a little. N has been in those woods before, and she knows how scary they can be. About 5 years ago, on the 4th of July weekend, she and I were playing hide-and-seek with my family in the woods. We were hiding together in a very small ravine in the center of the woods. It was hidden by bushes and devil's clubs. I remember the devil's club well because I got a blister on my ankle that hurt like hell. Ann and I played rock, paper, scissors as we were hiding. We heard walking coming toward us and thought we were going to get caught. A rule in my family when playing hide-and-seek is you're not allowed to leave your spot. We watched someone in a white hoodie and black pants walk by us. They would have seen us if they had looked to their right and down, but they didn't. We were eventually found by my older brother and walked back to the house with my auntie, who was also found. It was girls versus boys, and the boys won. It was perfect timing as well because my mom and grandma had just finished making dinner. But as Ann and I were getting ourselves some very full plates, I realized no one was wearing a white hoodie. It's okay, they probably took it off. But also, no one was wearing black jeans. I asked my dad if anyone had changed in the bathroom or something. Maybe they had thorns in their pant sleeves, but he told me he didn't think so. Ann and I told him about the person we saw walking past us, and he was worried, thinking someone was on our property. He also didn't like the thought of a trespasser in the woods, with all his daughters hiding. My dad took 3 of my uncles and went into the woods. They were gone for about an hour. They must have checked the entire property. My dad even called my mom and told her to ask me where we saw them. When they got back, my dad said they hadn't seen anyone and sat down in the living room with everyone else. My uncles, on the other hand, were talking very quietly. I knew only my Uncle Jay would tell me what was wrong, and I was right. It had rained a few hours before we went to play in the woods, meaning it was muddy. My Uncle Jay told N and me that they didn't see any footprints anywhere near the spot we were hiding, other than us 2 girls and my brothers. I was paranoid all night that I'd see the person in the woods walk by my window. The last time N was in those woods was when her, me, and our friend T decided to go camping out there. It was the end of summer, and us 3 girls wanted to go camping one last time before winter. We were too young to go camping by ourselves, so the next best thing was the woods on my property. Our campsite was pretty much dead center of the woods. We had my mom and dad's big tent that could fit 5 people, and my grandpa's 6-wheeler. My 2 friends, T and N, were so excited they didn't care about the stories. Honestly, so was I, and I wish I wasn't. We had got settled in our tent and started to play with a deck of cards I'd brought with us. As it got later and darker, well, as dark as it can get in Alaska, we decided to get comfy in our sleeping bags so we would be warm. Ann and I wanted to tell stories. T didn't believe in the paranormal, but listened to Ann and me talk about our favorite horror stories and urban legends. Ann and I, when talking about the Wendigo stories, would say the W us instead of the actual name, because we believed that saying its name would summon it. Ann is an Alaskan native, and so is her family. Her mom is the one who told us to never say the creature's name. T knew what we were talking about, and I'm pretty sure she knew not to say it, but she did anyway. "What exactly is the Wendigo?" T asked us. Ann and I whipped our heads in her direction. and I shouted that you should never say that word out loud. T only rolled her eyes and laughed. She wouldn't have been laughing if she knew what awaited us. It was around 1 or 2 in the morning when N woke me up. She whispered to me that she'd been awake for maybe an hour, and she could hear something walking around. My dad let me bring my mom's pistol with us, after we promised to be very careful with it, and that I'd be the only one to touch it unless absolutely necessary. I kept it near my sleeping bag. I was on the left side of the tent. N was in the middle, and I could see T was still asleep on the right side. N was a very light sleeper and was woken up by T's snoring. She was trying to go back to sleep when she heard something. I listened carefully, and I could hear something walking around. It wasn't very close, but it was close enough that we needed to pay attention. I thought it was maybe a moose, bear, or something else. That was quickly shut down when I realized it sounded like it was on 2 legs, not 4 like I was expecting. N reached over and shook T awake, putting her finger over her mouth to show T to be quiet. Then N pointed to her ears. T listened and looked at us confused. I shrugged my shoulders, showing I had no idea what it was. I kept my hand on my mom's pistol just in case. I got out my phone and I saw that it was about 2:30 a.m. I texted both my mom and dad saying that I could hear something walking around our campsite. They didn't respond. I wasn't surprised because it was past midnight, and my mom had just had my baby brother the week before. We listened as it got closer to our tent. We were now scared some animal was going to rip a hole in our tent and get us. It was getting closer to my side, so as quietly as we could, Ann and I scooted closer to T. Then we could smell it. It smelled so much like BO that I could almost taste it. T covered the bottom of her face with her blanket, and N was covering her nose with her hand. N looked at T and mouthed something that I couldn't see, but I could see the fear in T's eyes. Later, I found out N had mouthed the word Wendigo to her. We stayed quiet out of fear. We refused to even move. Even breathing felt too loud. We didn't want to let the thing outside know we were in the tent. Whatever was out there felt evil. I tried to listen as close as I could, but it was hard because my heart was beating so loudly. I'm pretty sure N and T could hear it. The sound of walking went around and stopped near the front of our tent. I was ready to shoot whatever it was through the tent. It was only a few seconds of silence, but it felt like hours. Then we heard a gunshot, we all jumped, and N gasped. It was loud, and I knew who it was. Our neighbor had a large collection of shotguns and would have target practice almost every day. I don't know what my neighbor was shooting at in the middle of the night, but I believe he saved our lives that night. He wasn't close enough to be shooting at the thing outside our tent, or even know that us girls were camping out there. We could hear the thing run past us and toward the river, away from us, my house, and our neighbor. It was fast. We sat there for a long minute, huddled together on one side of the tent, shaking. N asked in a hushed voice if we should go back to the house, but I was too afraid to leave the tent. I was scared the sound of the six-wheeler would bring it back, and I didn't want to leave all our stuff out there. So we just went back to sleep. We were pressed tight against each other. I don't think we could have been closer, and I'm not sure if N really did sleep that night. The next morning, when we had the courage to leave the tent, we could see small moose prints around our tent. I tried to ignore the fact that it looked like it was standing on 2 legs, and I just hoped it was a curious baby moose. N and T came to my house a bunch after that, but we never camped in the woods again. T and I still go camping together, but we make sure to go somewhere else. That wasn't the only time T experienced something here. One day when T was staying over, she woke me up in the middle of the night. I'm not sure when this was, but I believe sometime near Christmas. She was sleeping on my bed, and I was on the floor. It only took me a few seconds to realize why she'd woken me up. I could hear light tapping on my window. I looked up where I thought T's face was. Now, I live in the basement of my house. Half my room is underground, and the top half is on ground level. There are no trees or bushes near my window, so it couldn't be a branch, and 1/3 of my window was covered by snow. It was winter and completely dark. The tapping lasted about another 30 seconds. T and I were just holding each other's hand, trying not to freak out. T was obviously more freaked out because she'd been awake longer. I'm not sure who it was, but someone turned on the light in the upstairs bathroom, illuminating the backyard and my room. The tapping immediately stopped. I didn't want to move, but I needed to take advantage of the light. I stood up on my bed near T's feet and looked out the window. At first, I didn't see anything, until I looked a little harder. In the woods across the river, I thought I saw a tall person standing in the tree line. They were thin with long arms and legs. Their skin was almost white. I hope it was just my mind playing tricks on me, and it was just a strange-looking tree. But when I look out my window now at that same spot, I see nothing like I did that night. No tree out there looks even a little bit like that thing. After making sure my window was locked, I got off the bed and went to sleep, trying to forget about the tapping and the tall creature. Recently, my mom and I will hear whistling coming from behind our house across the river, like something is trying to get our attention. Every time I hear it, I am reminded of that creature and the time with Mari. Mari, Renee, and I were riding our grandpa's six-wheeler. It was early spring and the ice on the river was finally gone. We were behind the house at the end of the property. We were driving around and having fun when Mari randomly went quiet. Renee and I only noticed when she started to cry and panic. When we asked what was wrong, she wouldn't tell us. She sped to the house and ran inside, slamming the door behind her. Our mom thought we made her mad, and we got in trouble. Mari kept it to herself for months, and Renee and I forgot about it. I remembered that moment when writing this, and gave Marie a call. I asked her what she saw that day, and with a heavy sigh, Mary finally told me. Mary saw a very thin creature watching us from behind a tree. It was tall and pale. It almost looked like one of the birch trees near it. It was standing perfectly still, with long arms, just watching us. When it noticed Mari looking at it, she swore it smiled at her. Its teeth were sharp and yellow. Mari was only able to look away when it slowly hid back behind the tree. Even writing this right now, I had to get up and make sure my window was locked. I know what skinwalkers and wendigos are, and I believe something like them is in our woods. I don't think it can leave the property or come into the house, but that doesn't mean our house is safe. Ever since we moved in 11 years ago, strange things have been happening inside. One day, my little sisters, Allie and Jolene, ran up the stairs and into the living room, nearly tripping over each other. They said they were cleaning out the closet and watched the garage door close shut on its own. I tried convincing myself that it was just a gust of wind or the tilt of the house. But I know you can't shut that door without using all of your body weight. Both my mom and dad have heard light footsteps running up and down the basement hallway when none of us kids are home. Us girls will hear creaking, like someone is walking in our parents' room when they are both at work. When Renee and I were 15, we built a wall down the middle of our older brother's room after he moved out and put a new door in the hallway. Our rooms have always been strange, even when it was Thomas's room. When Renee was staying at a friend's house, I heard and recorded knocking coming from her side of our shared wall. I went to Renee's room to see if there was something on her wall, but all that was there were her hoodies on the rack. My older brother has always been able to see things others can't. When Thomas was living here at the house, he lived in the basement. Thomas told me about 3 spirits he'd seen in his room. 2 men that would argue all day, and at night, one would be sobbing in the closet, and a little girl he would see in his room. She looked like she was about 5 or 6 years old and wore a purple sundress. He said she would just stand in the corner of his room near the door and stare at him, not doing anything. He called her Sally. Sally was by my side of the room, which meant I was the one who had to deal with her. When I told Thomas about things in my room moving and hearing knocking and scratching on my door where he'd seen Sally, he told me Sally seemed more active after I moved into the room. Now, I should mention I had a rag doll named Cinnamon, and she has her own story that I'll tell after Sally's. Cinnamon would sit on the left side of my dresser, under my loft bed. Sally took a huge liking to Cinnamon and would try to play with her at night, when I wouldn't be interrupting. I'd wake up in the morning to Cinnamon facing a different direction, or find her on the floor. Things would move around Cinnamon as well, like my guitar or longboard falling or a drawer being opened when I wasn't in the room. I had enough of it and put Cinnamon in the garage, and my dad ended up moving her to the cargo container we have on the property. I haven't had anything happen in my room since then, but stuff still happens outside my window. Now for the story about Cinnamon herself. I named my rag doll Cinnamon because that's what it said on her apron. Cinnamon had red hair, black eyes, rosy cheeks, a cute white dress with red polka dots, and a white apron. Cinnamon was given to me as a Christmas present by my aunt when I was 4. That same Christmas, I had an allergic reaction that almost killed me. What did I have an allergic reaction to? The cinnamon in the gingerbread cookies my grandma made. I'm still severely allergic to cinnamon. Not just eating it, but touching it will cause hives and rashes on my skin. And cinnamon-scented things have caused me to have breathing problems. It's honestly pretty dangerous for me during the holidays. Like Thanksgiving and Christmas, almost everything has cinnamon in or on it. I believe that doll is evil, and with Sally attached to it, it might be worse or a little better. I'm not the only one in my family to have a rag doll. Renee once had one, and no matter what she did, she'd find that doll under her bed every morning. Even when Renee and I had to share a room, and even when we had to share a bed for a year, it would end up under her bed. Renee lost it when she was 10. We could never find it, and when we asked, no one knew where it was. Renee had named her Rag Doll Boogie Woogie. I asked my siblings what stories I should mention here, and Jolene told me to share the one with the moose. Jolene and I were the only ones home that day. Now Renee, Allie, and I all have dogs that will bark at anything and everything. If they see a moose, they lose their little minds barking. We heard Kay, Ali's dog, bark only twice. Jolene went to look at what he was barking at and saw the backside of a baby moose. I went upstairs to my parents' balcony to pay attention to the baby and keep an eye out for its mother in case she got too close to the dogs. When I got up there, I couldn't see it, but all 3 dogs were staring into the woods. They were all on edge. C, my dog, is a very large husky and has never cowered away from anything but fireworks and me when he's in trouble, and to see him scared meant something was seriously wrong. I got my dad's binoculars and tried to find the baby moose. Jolene had now joined me on the balcony and we couldn't find it. So we decided to get in my Jeep and drive over to where Jolene originally saw it. Lazy, I know, but I didn't feel like walking around in my PJs outside. Jolene got out with the binoculars and walked up the hill. She stood up there for about a minute before saying, Lynn, come here, something's wrong." I got out and joined her at the top of the hill. I could see the baby moose now. It wasn't moving. I took the binoculars from Jolene and looked for the moose. She was right. Something was very wrong. This moose was not okay. It had the features of a full-grown female, but it was the size of a baby. Its neck was too long and thick. Its eyes were too big, and it was just staring at us. It took one step toward us, and I knew we needed to run. The way it walked was messed up. It brought its leg all the way up until it touched its stomach, then put it back down and stepped closer. I grabbed Jolene's arm and pulled her down the hill and into my Jeep. Then I could smell it, the smell of a rotting animal. Jolene was gagging and nearly threw up, and I'm glad she didn't, because she would have refused to open the Jeep door. I parked as close as I could to the front door of the house and ran inside with Jolene. We called our dad and told him what happened, but he didn't think it was anything serious. He also joked that it was a skinwalker at dinner. I felt a ping of fear every time he said skinwalker. In the summer before fall, my mom, sisters, and I will clean up any garbage on our property next to the road. We stop when we reach the cliff overlooking the woods. Last year, Allie spotted a jar, and when she took a closer look, she saw it was a jar of dead bees. Allie called me over to show me, but then we noticed all the strange things about it. It was on the edge of the cliff, perfectly placed. The grass under it showed it had been there for a long time. How did we never see it? There was no lid on the jar, and there was nothing but bees in it. And I mean nothing. No dirt, no leaves, no other bugs. How could it sit there for so long and have nothing else in it? Allie and I got a weird vibe and decided to leave it alone. I got rid of it this year when I told a coworker this story, and she told me it could have been something used for witchcraft. The strange thing about it was that there were no more bees in it. All there was a black tar substance. Tossed it in the trash and forgot about it, just happy it's gone. These two stories Ali and Jolene told me to mention. Stories about when we had just moved in. When we were all younger and had just moved to this house, we had a pink unicorn stuffed toy that was almost our size. Us girls were home alone with our brother, playing on the phone that we shared. We had a king-sized bed that all four of us girls slept on. Mari, being the oldest of us girls, slept on her own bed on the floor. Our pink unicorn was sitting in a small chair in the corner. It was my turn on the phone. I think we were playing Subway Surfers. Then Renee gasped and pointed to the stuffy. It just moved its leg. Us girls, being scared and intrigued, set up the phone, pointed it at the stuffy, started the video, and ran out of the room. We waited about 5 minutes before asking Mari to go in and get the phone. We watched the recording as we were huddled on the corner of the couch. After 4 minutes, we started to think we were just being silly, and that Renee hadn't seen anything. But in the last 20 seconds of the video, we watched in shock as the pink unicorn's right leg moved, followed by its left arm moving as well. Both had moved to the right. We screamed and ran downstairs to our brother's room in the basement and showed him the video. We begged him to get rid of it, and he did. By giving it to his sweet lab dog MJ as a new toy, she tore that thing to shreds. When we showed it to our mom and dad, they tried to convince us it had just shifted. We didn't believe them. My grandpa had asked what I've been writing, and I was reminded of another story that I'd like to share. My grandpa's room is across the hall from mine, and my grandpa was helping my brother with a few things in his new house. My brother asked me to watch his dog, Black Lab MJ, while he was getting everything ready. I didn't want her in my room because the last time I watched MJ, she chewed up my photo book. So my brother put her in our grandpa's room after making sure she couldn't reach anything. All I needed to do was pop my head in the room and make sure she was okay with her food and water and take her out to go potty every 2 hours. One night, my grandpa had to stay over at my brother's new house to help with the moving van in the morning, meaning I would be watching MJ overnight and sleeping in my grandpa's room. My grandpa is a very heavy sleeper. The man has slept through earthquakes, But one night, I woke up to the sound of knocking, and MJ sat up in bed. I thought maybe it was already 5 a.m., and my mom was going to tell me to go upstairs and watch Alan. I yelled out, "Yeah!" and was about to tell my mom to wake up Renee because I had MJ. No one answered, and then I realized, if my mom was knocking on Grandpa's door, she remembers I have MJ. Confused, I got up and opened the door. No one was there or even down the hallway. I popped my head into Renee's room to see if she was messing with me, but she was asleep. It couldn't be my sisters because I would have heard them going back up the stairs. When I got back to Grandpa's room, MJ was now sitting on the floor in front of my grandpa's bathroom. She must have wanted to go there because that's where her food is. Thomas doesn't want her to have access to her food at night because then she'll need to go potty. She looked at me, then jumped up on my grandpa's bed again, ready to go back to sleep. I was about to get into bed when I heard the knock again. This time I was more awake and realized with wide eyes it was coming from the bathroom. I didn't waste a second. I grabbed MJ off the bed and ran into my room, locking the door behind me and getting into my bed. After a while of lying in bed praying not to hear the knocking again, or worse, hearing it on my door, I was so exhausted and was finally able to fall asleep with MJ next to me. The next day around noon, my brother came to get MJ to bring her to her new home, unpack all his stuff, and relax after all the moving. I wasn't even mad when I woke up and saw that she had gotten into my trash, and it was all over my room. I was just happy to not be in my grandpa's room. Thomas asked me how she was, and I told him what happened. Thomas wasn't even surprised and told me he'd always gotten a weird vibe from that room. That was the real reason he didn't pick it when we moved in. He originally said he let Grandpa take it because he'd feel bad making Grandpa walk all the way upstairs to use the bathroom. Now I'm wondering if that knocking happens every night, and if my grandpa just sleeps through it. What is in that bathroom? This last story my sister suggested is going to be about the white Ram music box that was left here by the previous owners, and I don't blame them. Since the day we moved in, we've always had this white Ram music box, and since the day we moved in, we've never liked it. My mom got rid of it after 4 or 5 years of having it, thankfully. The reason my mom got rid of it is that it would randomly start to play, and it was very creepy. We looked at it multiple times and couldn't see anything wrong with it. No one would ever wind it up or mess with it. It would just start playing, and most of the time, it would happen at the worst moment. If we were watching a horror movie, it would start to play. If we were playing hide and seek, it'd play when we were all quiet. If we were arguing, it'd interrupt us. Most of the time, it would play when someone was alone. Like if we were just hanging out in the living room alone, it would start to play. It was like it was messing with us, like it loved when we were scared. I've had enough of this house and property. I'm trying to move out with my dog, C, and it hasn't been easy. So is Renee and her dog, M. So far, the best thing to do is try to ignore all the strange things. Just yesterday, we were all outside playing badminton and heard what sounded like a mix of a banshee screaming and a car trying to start. Our baby brother, Alan, was the only one to acknowledge it. Alan is like Thomas, or it could just be that he's young, but he always sees our grandpa, who passed away long before Alan was born, and our deceased pit bull, B. Alan is actually named after our grandpa too. A part of me is creeped out by this, and the other part is happy that they aren't alone. Alan never sees just Grandpa, or just B. He always sees them together. Alan also used to see something in the bathroom that would make him run away crying. Alan was still learning to talk at the time, but when he was able to, and we would ask, he didn't remember. We used to have an American pit bull named B, He was an old dog and one of the most loving I've ever known. I'd gotten used to the routine of waking up, making coffee, and going on a walk with B. B and I would normally go up the driveway and back down, giving B just enough exercise in the morning, but not enough to exhaust him. But one morning, B started walking toward the woods, and I decided to follow him. B looks very scary, and even scarier when he's in a fight. B used to protect us kids from our old neighbor's dog when she'd get off her chain. The man didn't see anything wrong with his dog, even after my older brother got bit. She was just very aggressive and would attack anything and anyone with no reason. One day he was forced to put her down by the police because she had gotten off and attacked an elderly woman down the road who was now in the hospital. The dog was his ex-wife's, and he had no love for the dog. We moved soon after that. As I followed B, I realized everything was quiet, and I mean way too quiet. B stopped a little bit ahead of me, and I immediately felt like I was being watched. I looked around and didn't see anything. B was staring straight down the trail and was perfectly still. I didn't feel good about any of it, so I turned around and started walking back to the house, calling B to follow me. B was a very good and obedient dog. You never needed to tell him to do anything twice, and as we walked back to the house, B kept looking behind us. I felt something staring right at my back, and I started to walk a little faster. By the time I got to the house, I was running. I felt so bad for B because the moment we got into the house, he laid down, but he kept his eyes on the front door. He was the best dog a family could have. We miss you, buddy. I have many, many more stories, but none seem to be long enough to tell. Like the old lady's face we see in the dark corner of our parents' room, the baby handprints that will show up on Mari's mirror, the black-haired woman hanging in the shower that we see in the reflection of the bathroom mirror once a year, or the uneasy feeling of being watched at night from the windows. I don't know why this property has so much activity, and I don't know if I want the answer to that, or if I want to know what all of it is. I realize now why my parents ignore it all. I can't wait to leave this place. Something is tormenting my family. Update. From Alaska Chick. My older twin, Renee, and I have moved out into a small apartment with our 2 dogs, M and C. When we were looking at the apartment, we were also shown the one under us, and Renee and I both agreed that it gave us the creeps. So, obviously, we decided on the one upstairs. We finally finished moving in and have new neighbors downstairs. Just recently, we found out that 2 people passed away in that apartment, and it's haunted. We thought we've finally gotten away from all the paranormal, but it seems life has other plans. Our landlord has changed the light in front of the downstairs apartment door 3 times now, and it continues to flicker. Hopefully it's just the wiring, and I'll do my best to ignore it. We've also noticed that we will hear something moving around in the apartment under us when our neighbors aren't home. We know our neighbor has a cat, a black cat. We've seen the cat hanging out in the window most of the time, but the moving sound is much heavier than a cat. It sounds a lot like a large rug being moved back and forth. It's strange, and Renee and I are very happy to have not picked that apartment. Nothing has happened in our apartment, and the dogs never act weird. They love the apartment, and our downstairs neighbors might hate us, because 2 large huskies roughhousing in the living room is not quiet. Other than that, we're happy and love our apartment and quiet-ish life. My parents are planning to move off the property with my 2 younger sisters, Allie and Jolene, and my 2 younger brothers, Alan and JJ. Yes, my mom and dad had another baby. You'd think after 6 they'd stop. But no, and I'm not complaining at all. 7 of us are fine, and we love JJ. Grandpa is planning to stay on the property, though. I don't want him to, but he's never once been bothered by the strange happenings there. It also helps that he doesn't believe in it. I hope he changes his mind and sells the property. Update: Renee and I have had a great time living on our own, learning how to be adults, and I've met an amazing man I'll call Y. But recently, things have gotten a little strange. M, Renee's dog, has started to stare into the corner of Renee's room, not moving. It gets worse when I see both M and C doing this. One time I was at my deck in my room, and M ran in like he was hiding. I looked to see if he was hiding because he had done something bad, like get into the trash or peed somewhere in the house. But there was nothing. I told a coworker this, and he gave me some sage to burn. I'm really hoping this will help. Something else is, whenever we take our dogs outside to go potty, they'll stare off into the woods like they can sense something watching them. Once they're done, they'll pretty much run to the front door to get back inside. I always feel like something's right behind me when I finally get inside. Just yesterday, our downstairs neighbor across the hall tried to get into our apartment while Renee was in the shower, and I was at work. She sat outside our door for over 20 minutes, talking to herself. This was all caught on our neighbor's Ring camera across the hall. I had called, and the police were there in under 5 minutes. They took her away to a mental hospital, and we found out that she's been harassing and threatening our neighbor with the Ring camera for days. We feel a little safer with our neighbor having our phone numbers, just in case something happens. Renee plans to stay in Alaska, but I plan to move down to Montana with our mom and dad next year. They found a decent amount of land that is big enough for them to build a cabin, barn, and shed, leaving plenty of room for my older brother Thomas to build a home, and for me to build my dream cabin with Y and C, with a good distance of woods between our houses. Renee will be staying with her best friend while she finishes schooling. I hope and pray this year doesn't get crazier, but to be honest, I feel like things are only going to get worse. Deadly hide and seek. From Crypticop. It was your average late-night barbecue. Parents are drinking, kids hanging out at the neighbor's house, cool with a decent breeze every here and there. Just a normal hangout night for us growing up. The parents were at my house's front yard. Us kids were getting bored, so I suggested a nighttime game of hide-and-seek tag. Me and my friend, I'll call him Connor, were in my friend's backyard. We jumped up on the fence and sat there, waiting for someone to spot us. I am an addict of the paranormal. I watch ghost adventures and paranormal caught on camera. Anyway, the person that was it came around the corner. "I see you," he said, running towards us. We jumped down from the fence on the other side. We ran to Connor's house and walked around the other side. We sat there for around 15 minutes without a peep. I looked over to Connor, and he was shaking. I put my hand on his shoulder, and it was probably 30 degrees Fahrenheit around him. His face was pale. "Are you cold?" he asked me. I shook my head, and his face was white as snow. I turned around and saw 2 glowing red lights. They seemed to pierce my soul. They moved to the left and phased through the wall. I took off my coat and wrapped it around him. After 5 minutes, we heard a scream. It sounded like my little sister. We ran over to where we heard her and saw a dark figure standing over her. I stood tall and ran towards the figure. "Hey!" I yelled as I waved my arms. It turned around and was shocked by what I thought it was. Tall, impossibly thin, skeletal almost, with twisted antlers and red, piercing eyes. A Wendigo. It ran towards the woods, and my little sister was cold as ice. Up to this day, I haven't seen the Wendigo again, thank God. Forgotten Trail. From Leander Reffick. Growing up in the Appalachian Mountains, I had always been warned about the old trails. Some were safe, well-traveled paths that led to stunning overlooks. Others, my grandfather would say, were forgotten for a reason. When I was 16, my friends and I decided to take a shortcut through one of those abandoned trails to get to our campsite before dark. It was overgrown, barely a path anymore. But we pressed on, laughing at my grandfather's warnings. The deeper we went, the quieter the forest became. Birds stopped chirping. Even the rustling of leaves seemed to hush, as if the trees themselves were listening. That's when we noticed the carvings. Symbols etched into trees, some deep and fresh, others faded with age. Circles, spirals, strange figures with elongated limbs. None of us could understand them, but they all pointed in one direction, forward. By the time we realized we were lost, the sun had dipped below the mountains. That's when the whispering started. At first it was faint, like the wind through the trees. Then it grew clearer. Voices murmuring just beyond the edge of our flashlights. We called out, thinking it was someone messing with us. No answer. Only more whispers, circling us. Panic set in. We turned back the way we came, but the path was different, narrower, darker. The symbols on the trees had changed. Instead of abstract shapes, they now depicted human figures with hollow eyes and gaping mouths. And then, we saw them. Tall, thin shadows stood among the trees, barely visible, shifting when we tried to focus on them. One stepped closer. My friend Mark screamed and bolted. We all followed, crashing through the underbrush, running without direction. The whispers turned to laughter, mocking, distorted laughter. Somehow we stumbled out of the woods onto an old dirt road. The trail was gone. No opening in the trees, no sign of the path we had taken. Mark was never the same after that night. He stopped talking to us, moved away a year later. I tried to forget, but last week I went hiking with my girlfriend and saw something carved into a tree near our cabin. It was one of the symbols, freshly etched, and below it in deep, jagged letters was my name. I don't think we were supposed to leave that night, and I don't think they ever stopped watching. I couldn't sleep after seeing my name carved into that tree. My girlfriend, Sarah, tried to convince me it was just some prank, but I knew better. The symbols, the whispers, I felt them again, just like that night in the woods. I told myself I was imagining things, but the feeling of being watched never left me. Then, 2 nights ago, I heard something outside our cabin. At first, it was just the usual nighttime sounds, the wind, the occasional crack of a branch. But then I heard the whispering. Soft, indistinct, just outside the window. I lay frozen in bed, barely breathing. Sarah was asleep beside me, oblivious. I turned my head slowly, my pulse hammering in my ears. Through the thin curtain, I could see the outline of something tall, standing just beyond the trees, watching. I shut my eyes tight, whispering to myself that it wasn't real, that I was still dreaming. The next morning, I found footprints outside the cabin. Not regular footprints. Elongated, misshapen, like whatever had been out there wasn't entirely human. The dirt was disturbed around the base of a nearby tree, and carved into its bark was another message. You left. We remember. I haven't told Sarah yet. I don't want to scare her, but I know I have to do something. I can feel them getting closer. The whispers don't fade anymore. They follow me, lingering at the edges of my hearing, creeping into my thoughts. I don't know what they want. I don't know why they let me go that night. But I do know one thing. I don't think they'll let me leave again. There's a man in the woods. From Lindy and Mindy. So my friend, I'll call her Sarah, and I decided to go camping last weekend. We've been friends since college and try to do these little weekend trips a few times a year, usually just car camping at state parks within a couple hours of the city. Nothing too crazy. We're not exactly hardcore outdoors women or anything, though Sarah always insists on bringing her pepper spray ever since she had a weird encounter at a campground last year. This time we picked this smaller state park that neither of us had been to before, maybe about an hour and a half outside of Portland. We got there Friday afternoon and found our campsite easily enough. It was late September, so the campground was pretty empty. Just a few other sites occupied from what we could tell. Our spot was kind of tucked away at the end of one of the loops, which we liked since it felt more private. We set up the tent, got a fire going, made some dinner, had a few beers. Pretty standard camping stuff. That first night, though, something felt off right from the start. The woods just felt weirdly quiet, like, you know how you usually hear birds and stuff? There was none of that. We were sitting by the fire chatting about Sarah's new job when I got this weird feeling like we were being watched. You know that feeling where the hair on the back of your neck stands up? Yeah, that. I kept glancing around, trying to play it cool, when I noticed some movement in the trees behind our site. The fire was pretty bright, so the woods beyond our circle of light looked extra dark. At first, I thought it was probably just a deer or something. We'd seen a few earlier when we were setting up. But then I saw him. This guy was just standing there, partially hidden behind this big pine tree, completely still, like absolutely motionless. He was massive, had to be at least 6 feet 5 inches, and built like a linebacker, with this huge scraggly dark beard and long matted hair that hung in his face. He had on these filthy jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in months, and this red and black flannel shirt that was all torn up at the sleeves. The creepiest part was his eyes. I could see them reflecting the firelight, just fixed on us. When he realized I'd spotted him, he didn't even flinch or try to hide, just kept staring, his head tilted slightly to the side like he was studying us. After what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds, he started backing away super slowly into the darkness. He moved in this weird way, like he was trying to stay facing us as long as possible before the darkness swallowed him up. I waited until I was sure he was gone, before I told Sarah what I'd seen. She immediately got super freaked out. Like, I could see her hands shaking as she grabbed her pepper spray from her backpack. We decided to call it a night right then, practically running around the campsite doing a speed cleanup. Made sure every scrap of food and all our supplies were locked in the car, grabbed our phones and the pepper spray, and dove into the tent. We lay there whispering about whether we should leave, jumping at every little snap of a twig outside. Neither of us slept more than a few minutes at a time that night, but thankfully nothing else happened. The next day we tried to shake it off. We went hiking, explored some trails around the lake, tried to convince ourselves it was nothing. Maybe the guy was just another camper taking a walk, who didn't want to startle us by saying hello. Still, we made sure to stick together and stay on the main trails. Sarah kept her pepper spray in her pocket the whole time, which made us feel a little safer. That afternoon, though, we had our second encounter with him, and it was so much worse than the first. We were heading back to our campsite after our hike, both of us already a little on edge, because the trails had been completely empty. We hadn't seen another person all day. The sun was getting lower, and the shadows were starting to stretch across the trail when we heard this weird shuffling noise behind us. It wasn't like normal hiking footsteps. It was this irregular dragging sound, like someone deliberately trying to walk strange. Neither of us wanted to look back at first. We just kind of exchanged this terrified glance both knowing exactly what we were thinking. Sarah's hand went straight to her pocket where the pepper spray was. When we finally did turn around, there he was, maybe 50 feet back on the trail. Just standing there in broad daylight this time, but somehow that made it even creepier. He was wearing the same filthy clothes as the night before, but now we could see dark stains all over them that I really didn't want to think about. His matted hair was partially covering his face, but I could see him grinning, this horrible yellow-toothed grin that made my stomach turn. We stood frozen for a second, and so did he, like some twisted game of red light, green light. When we started walking again, he matched our pace exactly. Every time we sped up, he sped up too, keeping that exact same distance. Not getting closer, but not letting us get away either. Sarah was squeezing my arm so hard it hurt. Her other hand gripped tight around the pepper spray in her pocket. But I barely noticed because my heart was pounding so loud in my ears. I looked back one more time when we were almost to our sight, and that's when I saw his face clearly. His eyes were wide and gleaming with this, I don't know how to describe it, this horrible excitement. Like he was having fun terrifying us. But there was something else there too. Something wild and unhinged that made him seem barely human. He wasn't even trying to hide what he was thinking anymore, just staring at us with this expression that seemed to say he was imagining all the things he could do to us. Not angry, like I said, but something way worse, something predatory. He just stood there in the middle of the trail as we hurried away, that twisted grin still on his face, swaying slightly back and forth like he was listening to music only he could hear. The whole thing probably only lasted a few minutes, but it felt like hours. We seriously considered packing up and leaving right then, but it was already getting late, and we didn't love the idea of trying to take down camp with that guy potentially lurking around. Plus, we'd paid for 2 nights and had all our dinner stuff planned out. Looking back, that sounds so stupid, but at the time we kind of talked ourselves into staying. We figured we'd just stay close to our site, keep the fire going, and leave first thing in the morning. Sarah kept the pepper spray right next to her the whole time. That night was when everything went from creepy to absolutely terrifying. We'd just finished eating, but neither of us was really hungry. We'd basically forced down some crackers and cheese because we knew we should eat something. We were sitting really close to the fire, like practically on top of each other, both of us fighting the urge to constantly look over our shoulders. The flames were dying down, but neither of us wanted to get up to add more wood, because that meant turning our backs to the darkness. Around 9:30, the crickets suddenly went silent. You know how in horror movies people always say that's a bad sign? Yeah, turns out there's a reason for that. At first it was just this oppressive silence, but then we started hearing this sound. This low, raspy mumbling coming from somewhere in the darkness behind our tent. It wasn't like someone having a conversation or talking to themselves. It was this weird, rhythmic muttering that would stop and start randomly. Sometimes it sounded like he was counting, other times like he was reciting something over and over. We couldn't make out the words, but honestly, I don't think I want to know what he was saying. Then the footsteps started. He was circling our campsite, moving through the woods just beyond the firelight. The sound would fade away to one side, and just when we'd start to relax a tiny bit, we'd hear a twig snap from a completely different direction. He was playing with us, getting a little closer with each circle. Sometimes we'd hear him dragging his hand along the outside of our car as he passed, or rustling through our camp chairs. The whole time, that awful muttering never stopped. The fire was getting really low now, casting these long, shifting shadows that made it impossible to tell what was him and what wasn't. Every time we'd look toward a sound, we'd catch this glimpse of movement just at the edge of our vision, but when we'd turn to look directly at it, there'd be nothing there. It was like he was everywhere and nowhere at the same time. Sarah had the pepper spray out now, but we both knew it wouldn't do much good if we couldn't even tell where he was. Then the footsteps stopped right behind our tent. The muttering got louder, and we could start to make out some of what he was saying. Stuff about pretty girls and come out to play in this scratchy sing-song voice that made my skin crawl. Sarah and I were frozen, holding on to each other and staring at the tent wall where we could see his shadow looming over us. He started running his hand down the outside of the tent, this slow scraping sound that seemed to go on forever. Then he grabbed the rain fly and started shaking it really hard, making this horrible laughing sound. Sarah tried to get the pepper spray ready, but her hands were shaking too badly. I finally snapped out of it and hit the emergency call button, yelling that we were calling the police. The laughing stopped immediately, and we heard him sprint off into the woods. We didn't even think about packing up the tent or anything. We just grabbed our phones, keys, and the pepper spray and ran to my car, jumping in and locking the doors. As I was starting the engine, the headlights caught him standing at the edge of our campsite, just staring at us with this twisted grin on his face. I threw the car in reverse and got us out of there as fast as I could. We drove straight to the ranger station, but it was closed for the night. There was an emergency number posted, so we called it and filed a report. They sent a deputy out to check the campground, but of course they didn't find anyone. We went back the next morning with the ranger to get our stuff. The tent was still there, but all our other camping gear had been scattered around the site, and a lot of it was broken or slashed up. The ranger said they'd had a few other reports of a man matching that description in the area over the past couple months, but they'd never been able to catch him. Apparently, he'd never gotten physically violent with anyone, but he'd scared quite a few campers. They think he might be living in the woods, somewhere around there. Needless to say, Sarah and I won't be camping at that park again. Actually, we probably won't be camping anywhere for a while. We still talk about it sometimes, wondering who he was and what he really wanted. Part of me hopes they catch him, but another part of me doesn't want to know. Hunting and Ghosts, from Grigness. I've never told many people about what happened that autumn when I was 17. I mean, who'd believe it? Hell, sometimes I'm not even sure I believe it myself, except that my uncle saw something too, which makes it harder to just write off as my imagination. I grew up in a small town about an hour outside of Atlanta, the kind of place where hunting was just something everybody did. I'd been handling rifles since I was 12, started with small game and worked my way up to deer. By 17, I thought I knew everything there was to know about hunting, which is probably why I was stupid enough to ignore all the no trespassing signs on Old Man Cooper's property. The thing about Cooper's land was that it had the best deer spots in the county. Everyone knew it, but nobody hunted there because Cooper was serious about keeping people off his property. He'd caught some kids drinking there once and nearly shot them with rock salt. But I'd spent that whole summer scouting it out, finding the perfect hunting spots, learning where the game cameras were, and figuring out how to slip in without being seen. It was early October, still warm enough that you didn't need much more than a light jacket in the morning. I'd gotten up well before dawn and made my way through the back of our property, across the creek, and into Cooper's woods. I had this perfect spot picked out, a natural blind in a cluster of white oaks where I could see a heavily used deer trail. I'd even built a rough platform about 12 feet up using some 2x4s and rope. Real amateur stuff, looking back on it. I settled in just as the sky was starting to lighten. The morning was dead quiet, except for the occasional acorn dropping. I had my old Remington 700 with a decent scope. Nothing fancy, but it did the job. The first couple hours were uneventful. I saw a few squirrels, a raccoon, but no deer. Around 9:30, I was starting to think about packing it in when I caught movement through my scope about 80 yards out. At first, I thought it was a deer moving through the undergrowth. But as I focused, I realized it was a person. My heart started hammering. I thought Cooper had caught me. But then I got a clear look through the scope, and I forgot all about being caught. It was a young woman, probably in her early 20s, wearing what looked like an old-fashioned white dress. Not like a wedding dress, more like something from an old photograph, kind of simple and plain. She was pale, not just white, but this kind of grayish pale that didn't look quite right. Her hair was long and dark, hanging loose down her back. She was just walking, real slow and deliberate, like she was looking for something. Now I know what you're thinking. Some girl in a dress walking through the woods. Must be drugs or maybe someone playing a prank. That's what I tried telling myself too. But there was something off about the way she moved. It was like, you know how when you watch an old film and the frame rate isn't quite right? Everything looks just a little bit wrong? It was like that. Plus, she wasn't making any sound. No crackling leaves, no snapping twigs, nothing. I watched her through the scope for what must have been 5 or 10 minutes. She never seemed to be going anywhere in particular, just walking in this weird pattern, sometimes stopping to look at the ground or reach out to touch a tree. I was so focused on her that I almost fell out of my blind when a crow suddenly cawed right overhead. When I looked back through the scope, she had stopped moving. She was just standing there, completely still. Then, slow as anything, she turned her head and looked directly at me. I mean directly at me, not at the tree I was in, not at the general area, but right into my eyes through the scope. Her face? God, her face. It was young but somehow ancient at the same time, and her eyes were completely black, like empty holes. I jerked back from the scope so hard I cracked my head on a branch. When I looked again with my naked eye, she was gone. Just gone. No movement, no sound, nothing. It was like she'd never been there at all. I was trying to get my breathing under control, telling myself I was seeing things, when I felt it. This cold pressure on my right shoulder, like someone had laid their hand there. Not just cool, but cold. The kind of cold that burns. Before I could move or scream or do anything, I heard a whisper right in my ear, clear as day. Go home. The voice was female, young but stern, like a mother warning a child. I've never climbed down from a tree stand so fast in my life. I'm honestly surprised I didn't break my neck. I ran all the way home, crashed through our back door sweating and shaking. My mom took one look at me and thought I'd seen Cooper with his shotgun. I let her think that it was easier than trying to explain what really happened. I spent the next few days trying to convince myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd dozed off in the stand and dreamed it. Maybe it was some kind of weird hallucination from dehydration. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. I started doing research, looking up the history of Cooper's land. Turns out, there used to be an old homestead out there in the 1800s, belonged to a family named Whitaker. I found a few mentions in county records about a daughter who disappeared in 1878, but not much else. About 2 weeks later, my Uncle Mike asked if I wanted to go hunting with him. He had permission to hunt some land that bordered Cooper's property, maybe half a mile from where I'd seen whatever I'd seen. I said yes, partly because I didn't want him to think I was scared of hunting, but mostly because I wanted to see if anything weird would happen again. We got out there early, same kind of morning as before. Uncle Mike set up about 200 yards from me, each of us watching different sections of a field edge. I had a good spot, but I couldn't focus. I kept scanning the tree line, looking for any sign of movement, any flash of white. My uncle probably thought I was the worst hunting partner ever. I missed 2 perfect shots that morning because I was so distracted. Around noon, we packed it in and met up to head back to the truck. We were walking along this old logging road when Uncle Mike got real quiet. After a minute, he asked me if I'd seen anyone else out there that morning. I said no, trying to sound casual about it. He was quiet again for a bit, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Well, I saw something strange," he said. "There was this little girl, couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, sitting on the ground about 20 yards from your position. She was wearing this old-fashioned looking dress, real dirty like she'd been playing in the mud. She was just sitting there, staring in your direction." I was about to shout, to ask if she was lost, but when I looked down to put my thermos in my pack and looked back up, she was gone. He looked at me real hard then, like he was trying to figure something out. "The weird thing is," he continued, "she reminded me of an old photo my grandmother used to have, of her aunt who died as a child back in the 1870s. Same kind of dress, same long dark hair." I still didn't tell him what I'd seen 2 weeks before. But later that night, I found an old county map from 1875 online. Turns out the Whitaker homestead, the daughter who disappeared, they were my uncle's ancestors. The land had been sold to Cooper's grandfather after the family moved away following the disappearances. I've been back hunting plenty of times since then, but never on Cooper's land. Sometimes when I'm in the woods at dawn, when the light's just starting to filter through the trees, I think I catch glimpses of something white moving between the trunks. I don't look too hard anymore. Some things you're just not meant to see clearly. Uncle Mike and I have never really talked about what we saw that day. But every now and then, when we're hunting together, I'll catch him scanning the tree line, looking for something that isn't quite there. And sometimes, I swear, I can feel cold fingers on my shoulder, warning me away from places I shouldn't be. There's something toying with me. From Ron Kip. This has been happening for a while now. When it first started, I would get the feeling something was watching me when I was alone. I've always been the adventurous type, and would regularly go out and explore the woods around my home. We live in a small rural town in Missouri, so forestation is everywhere. I never had a problem with seeing unexplainable things when I was younger. When things first started, I was 14, going through the woods trying to find a place to build a small log cabin. As I was searching, I started getting goosebumps, and the hair on my arms seemed to stand up. I ignored it and kept looking. Later that day, I had gotten the feeling something was watching me. Living in such an isolated place, we have things like wild pigs, bears, and mountain lions, but there were no signs that any of those were near me. I started to worry a bit and decided to turn around and continue my search the next day. As I was walking back home, the feeling never left. I thought maybe I was just paranoid, and there was nothing there, so I stopped moving to listen for footsteps. At first, I could hear the sound of wind moving the tree branches, but after that had stopped, I heard nothing. Remembering from a book I had read that when you can't hear any animals around, there's a predator nearby. I knew I wasn't the predator, as the animals by my house were used to me walking around the woods. Realizing there was a bigger threat nearby, I started running back to my house. Until I had reached the house, the feeling of being watched was there. But the moment I stepped foot in the door, it left. Things like that continued happening for a while, so I got used to it. But ever since about a month ago, things have changed. My first new encounter was after it had snowed. I live in the second story of our house with a window viewing the neighboring field and woods. I was sick at the time, so I had been in my room all day. Wanting some fresh air, I opened my window. As soon as I opened the window, I felt watched as usual, but this time was different. It never happened while I was inside my house, nor did it ever feel this strong. Worried, I started scanning the tree line of the woods, which is about a football field away. But I have vision problems, and my glasses had been broken just the day before from being stepped on. I've never been one for contacts, as they take time for me to get in. So, wanting to see the tree line better, I went and grabbed a pair of binoculars. My pawpaw was a soldier in World War II, and the binoculars were one of the things he had brought back, whether he was allowed to or not. Knowing they would be good enough to see well with at that distance, I took them up to my room. While I was grabbing them, I never got the feeling I was being watched, but when I stepped back into my room, it was back. I grabbed my chair and sat up in front of the window, scanning the tree line for anything. Eventually, I came to a stop, seeing something. It was a black mass that looked to be about 6 feet 5 inches to 7 feet tall, peeping around a tree. I stared at it for a few minutes, seeing if it would move or if it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I turned to cough, and when I looked back, it was looking around the other side of the tree. Knowing it was staring at my house or worse at me, I ran downstairs and grabbed my mom, bringing her up to show her. When we had gotten back to my room, it was gone. My mom has always been one to believe in the supernatural, so she didn't think I was crazy for seeing this. She told me to come get her if I see it again. A week later, nothing had happened. I thought maybe it was just my vision blurring, or a smudge on the lens. That night, no longer worried about it, I was going to bed. I was just about to fall asleep when I heard what sounded like my uncle yell my name. I sprang up, turning my phone's flashlight on to see nothing in my room. Scared, I lay back down and tried to forget about it and go to sleep. Around 5 minutes later, I'm close to falling asleep when I hear a blood-curdling scream come from out my window. I quickly sat up and turned the lights on, closing my window. This time, I was not the only one to hear something. My sister ran into my room, asking if that was me. I told her it was not, wanting to scare her as she's a lot younger than me. She told me to shut the heck up and go to bed. I closed my door and sat awake in my room all night with all the lights on. Morning came, and I went about my day as usual. By the time night came, I had almost forgot about it. I laid down, locking my door, as I didn't want to be woken up early the next day. About 15 minutes later, I started to fall asleep when I hear what sounds like my grandma outside my door, asking me to let her in. I started praying to God, asking him to help with what's all been happening the past week. After the voice stops, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up about 1:30 p.m. the next day, not bringing up what had happened the past 2 nights to my family. When I was about to go to bed that night, I decided to try an experiment, as the first night the voice happened, my door was cracked open, and the next, it was shut and locked. I opened my door all the way before laying down. When I laid down, though, I heard tapping on my window. Ignoring it, I go to bed, waking up the next day to take a shower. But when I was about to get in the shower, I noticed markings on my body that I never noticed before. That day, I looked up what had happened to me the past few days, and came to the conclusion that what's been bothering me was a mimic. For those of you who don't know, mimics are creatures that can take the voices of people familiar to you. These creatures gain strength from your fear and by you responding to them. With it growing stronger, it can take form into your family and friends, but these forms are distorted. Finding this out, I go over to my friend's house who lives about 10 minutes away. Getting there, I tell him about the things that had happened to me and what I think it may be. It took some convincing for him to believe me, but he eventually did. He's a very spiritual guy and offered to pray with me for me. I agreed and took his hand. As he began to pray, I felt a force trying to pull our hands apart. He had felt it as well. Ever since then, I've still heard the voices, giving me a severe case of insomnia as I've had a hard time sleeping. Things seem to be getting worse, and I wonder, what does that mean for me? My uncle's encounter. From Maryland Crypt Hunter 198. I live in Maryland's eastern shore, and this is my uncle's story. For this story, let's call him S. My uncle is a believer in all things folklore, and he has had many encounters with the paranormal. Out here in Maryland, we have a lot of entities per se. We have the usual, Sasquatches, human-like wolves, a little bit of Wendigos up west, and the most famous one, of course, being the Maryland Goat Man. But for this story, he didn't encounter any of those things. What he encountered isn't a hostile creature, and has no known attacks. My uncle encountered the Chessie. Now, the Chessie is kind of like Maryland's version of the Loch Ness Monster, and many people say that it is related to it. But whatever you believe, it doesn't matter. I am sure we can all agree it exists. Anyway, back in 2007, my uncle and his friend, let's call him R, were hanging out at my uncle's house. My uncle and R decided to go for a walk, which led them to a part of the Chesapeake Bay. My uncle and R were on a pier, minding their own business, when suddenly, in the distance, he saw a round, dark thing appear out of the water. He believes it was the Chessie's back. Anyway, the thing kept disappearing and reappearing closer and closer to the pier, and when the entity was about 10 feet away, the entity grew until they could see its face. He says it was round, long, and it had glowing eyes. The creature looked directly at them, and then swam away, deeper into the bay. My uncle swears this story is true, and at first I did not believe him, but that day he had a camera on him and took pictures of the creature. He showed me the pictures, and I knew it was the legend. My uncle has had encounters with demons, unidentified entities, and more, and I would tell you all the stories, but maybe some other time. Anyway, if you look for entities, you will find them. Be careful out there. Surviving Helene in Appalachia. From Gearhead 993. I live a very quiet life in the hills of Appalachia, in a small town tucked away in western North Carolina. Most would say small towns are very unexcitable, and you'd be right about 90% of the time. Aside from the occasional Saturday night knockdown, drag-out domestic disputes the neighbors get into from time to time, not much goes on around my neck of the woods. At least it didn't used to, until about 4 months ago. I still have nightmares about that night to this day. We had been preparing for the worst, not that we had been expecting much. Usually storms would otherwise dissipate by the time it reaches us, but this time was different. All week I had a gut feeling that something was off. Call it a sixth sense, if you will. Something in the air just didn't feel right. So we decided to take every precaution necessary. But nothing would prepare us for what we were about to witness. 4 a.m. The first cracks of thunder began to rattle the house. We awoke to the sounds of sirens blaring at the fire station about a mile or two down the road. Winds began beating against the windows. We got up, got dressed really quick, and made our way down to the basement level of the house and prepared for the worst. 5 a.m. We heard a loud crack from outside. My husband peeked out the window, only to see our big magnolia tree falling out in front of our house just barely missing the house by mere inches. Now I need to stop here and tell you that magnolia's trees are not native where we live. Me and my husband planted this magnolia tree ourselves when we first bought our home here. I'm originally from the Madison area of Mississippi, and magnolias have been a part of my life as long as I can remember. I'm sure you understand the heartbreak I endured when it fell was truly immense. I only count my blessings that it missed hitting the house. I tell myself it sacrificed itself to save us, but deep down I know that's just what I tell myself to cope with the loss. 6 a.m. Our phones lit up and began blaring to the tune of tornado warnings for our area. Now, up until this point, I had kept a pretty level-headed composure about myself throughout this whole experience. But I swear to God, nothing scares me more than tornadoes. Honestly, I'd rather deal with a gigantic spider than the unknown of a tornado headed our way. Especially in the eerie darkness of the early morning hours, before daylight breaks through the night sky. As much as the wind beat against our windows, I don't believe we were hit by a tornado. Although I found out later that 2 had made a touchdown in the area, including one that actually tore through a small trailer park nearby. Imagine that. After this, I fell asleep for a few hours due to sheer exhaustion. 9:30 a.m. I awoke to my ringer going off. It was my mom. "Hello?" I say with a yawn. "You guys okay?" I hear on the other end. "Yeah, we're all right. Just cuddled up in the basement," I said. But before I could get another word in, she said, "Honey, get out of there. They say the levees are starting to give away." No sooner than she got the words out, the windows burst, and river waters began rushing in, flooding the basement. Before I could blink, we were underwater. My fight or flight kicked in, and I swam up to safety as quickly as I could. I barely got up the stairs into the main level of the house. Thankfully, we all made it out of the house alive before it got any worse. We jumped in the car and took off down the road towards my mom's house. We managed to make it up the road about 3/4 of a mile before we were stopped dead in our tracks due to trees fallen in the middle of the road. My hubby whips it in reverse and heads in the other direction to try and find a way around it. No luck. We were blocked in all directions. "What are we going to do?" I asked my husband in a shaky voice. "The only thing I can think of is head back to the house and grab the chainsaw and try to cut our way through it," he said. We turned back and grabbed his chainsaw and managed to cut our way through. 11 a.m., back on the road. We made it up to the nearest gas station to refuel. I thought it odd that they actually had power in all this. I walked in and asked the cashier if they had a phone I could use to call my mom and let her know we were okay. "There's a landline on the back wall," he said as he pointed. I found it and got in touch with my mom and told her we were headed that way. I grabbed an orange Gatorade and paid the clerk and thanked him for his trouble. He nodded, and I made my way back out to the car, and we got back on the road. We got to my mom's neighborhood and ran into one other tree down blocking our path. Thankfully, this one was a bit smaller than the last one, and we managed to cut through it with little to no trouble. Got to my mom and dad's house and found out they were out of power. But hey, it was safer than dealing with a flooding house at the time. We camped out there until the storm passed and the dust settled. We rode back to the house Saturday afternoon to find the house had major flood damage. So needless to say, we ended up moving back in with the parents for a little while until things were settled with the insurance company and were able to get rebuilding. The irony in all this. One is we actually ended up staying in Mom and Dad's basement after it all. If there is a God out there, I firmly believe he has a pretty twisted sense of humor about things. The other bit of irony of it all, and what I feel is the funniest thing about it all. The very weekend all this took place was also the weekend of my birthday. Talk about going out with a bang. Now I know there's a lot of conspiracies surrounding what happened with this storm and the aftermath. I'm no conspiracy theorist by any means, but one thing I want to say is this storm was unlike anything I have ever seen or experienced in my life. The thing that shook me the most about it is how hard it hit North Carolina. All my life I have always been led to believe that with hurricanes, as they make landfall, they begin to deteriorate very rapidly. It made landfall in Florida, which means it should have been a Cat 1 or even a tropical storm by the time it got all the way up to North Carolina. But it didn't. It hit us as a Cat 4. That is not normal. Now I'm not going to sit here and make any wild accusations. I mean, hell, I'm just a country bumpkin from the foothills of Appalachia. But I would feel very safe in saying that it would not be a far stretch to say someone or something was tampering with the powerful forces of nature. Why? I have no idea. All I know is that Helene will go down as the scariest unnatural experience of my entire life. Possible Sasquatch on my property. From Snowho Joe. I've never been the kind of person to make up stories, and I surely wouldn't be telling this one if it didn't happen to me. I own a decent-sized piece of land in Washington state, just outside of a small town, and my property butts right up against a stretch of national forest. I've been living here for over 10 years, and I know these woods like the back of my hand. I've hunted, hiked, and camped out here more times than I can count. But what I saw that night was something different. It happened late one summer, right as the days started getting shorter. I had a routine. Every evening I'd walk my property line, just making sure everything was in order. The deer had been more active lately, so I kept an eye out for any signs of them getting into my vegetable garden. That night, it was just me and my dog Jake, a big German shepherd who doesn't scare easy. The sun had already dipped below the tree line, leaving just enough light to see by, but I had a flashlight strapped to my belt just in case. As we moved along the back of my property, near where my land meets the forest, Jake stopped dead in his tracks. His ears perked up, and a low growl rumbled from his chest. Now I've seen him get worked up over a coyote before, but this was different. His whole body went rigid, and he didn't take his eyes off the tree line. I followed his gaze, and that's when I noticed something was off. The woods went completely quiet. If you've spent any time in the wilderness, you know there's always noise. Crickets, birds, the occasional rustling of something in the underbrush. But at that moment, it was dead silent. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. That's when I heard it. A deep, low grunt, almost like a mix between a bear and a man clearing his throat. It came from just beyond the tree line, maybe 20 or 30 yards in. I flicked on my flashlight and aimed it toward the sound, expecting to see a bear or maybe an elk. Instead, my beam landed on something else entirely. At first, I thought it was just a big shadow from a tree or bush, but then I noticed 2 eye shines suspended in the air, locked onto me. But as my eyes adjusted, I could make out the shape of something big, real big. It was standing just behind a tree, partially obscured, but I could see enough. The thing had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe more. Its shoulders were massive, wider than any man I'd ever seen, and its body was covered in dark, matted hair. I could see its breath in the cool night air, slow and steady, like it wasn't in any hurry. For a few seconds, neither of us moved. Jake was still frozen, his growl turning into a whimper, which was enough to send a chill up my spine. That dog wasn't afraid of anything, and yet, here he was, cowering next to me. That's when I realized something. Whatever this was, it was standing on 2 legs. I don't know what possessed me to do it, but I took a step forward, my flashlight still aimed at the thing. As soon as I did, it let out a noise that I can only describe as a growl mixed with a deep, guttural yell. My whole body locked up, and before I could react, it moved back into the woods. And when I say moved, I mean it was gone in an instant. 1 second it was standing there. The next, it was nothing but shadows and the sound of snapping branches as it tore through the underbrush. Jake and I didn't stick around after that. I turned and made my way back to the house as fast as I could without outright running. I locked up every door and window, grabbed my rifle, and sat in my living room listening. Jake paced near the door, his ears twitching at every little sound outside. I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I went back to where I'd seen it. I half expected to find nothing, maybe convince myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. But there were tracks, big ones. They weren't bear tracks, and they sure as hell weren't human. They were wide, deep, and had a shape too similar to a foot for comfort. Whatever made them had weight behind it. I haven't talked about this with too many people. The few I have told either laugh it off or say it was probably just a bear. But I know what I saw, and that wasn't a bear. Since that night, I've had a few other strange things happen. Tree knocks in the middle of the night, the occasional weird howling sound far off in the woods. But I've yet to see it again. I don't know if it was just passing through or if it's still out there, watching. Either way, I make sure not to go walking in those woods after dark anymore. Sometimes, late at night when I'm sitting on my porch, I get that same feeling again. The one that makes my skin crawl, like I'm being watched. It's subtle, but it's there. Jake picks up on it too. He'll suddenly go stiff, staring into the darkness, growling low in his throat. A few times I've even heard branches snapping in the distance, the same way they did that night. But every time I grab my flashlight and look, there's nothing there. Just the still, quiet woods. One night, about 2 months after the encounter, I found something else. I was out checking my property line during the day this time, and near the same spot where I'd seen it, I came across a deer carcass. But this wasn't like any kill I'd seen before. The thing had been ripped apart. Its rib cage was cracked open like something had just torn into it with brute force. I've seen cougar and bear kills before, but this was different. There were no bite marks, no clean cuts, just raw, jagged force, like it had been pulled apart with hands instead of claws. I don't know what's out there. I don't know if it's still watching. But I do know one thing. I'll never forget what I saw that night. And I sure as hell won't be camping or walking into those woods at night. Thanks for stopping by our little campsite here at Outdoor Terrors. To hear your story on the show, send it to us at darkstories.org. For more scary stories from me, catch me on my other podcasts, Unexplained Encounters and Tales from the Break Room on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast app. Or go to eeriecast.com for those and even more terrifying podcasts. Follow me on X or Twitter at Dark Prevails, and if you don't mind, leave a rating for Outdoor Terrors on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Till next time, I'll see you soon when the campfire blazes once again.